This this is the Impressions Xchange podcast.
Impressions Xchange podcast,
where all topics impacting the graphic imaging and printing industry are addressed via in-depth news coverage, analysis, and timely interviews.
Welcome to the Impressions Xchange podcast. I'm Ashley Roberts, managing editor at Printing United Alliance and host of today's episode. I'm joined by Mark Michelson, editor-in-chief of Printing Impressions, where we discuss drupa. Having just returned from Dusseldorf, we thought it was the perfect time to reminisce on drupa's past. We go back 38 years to Mark's first drupa, laugh about some of his most memorable experiences over the years, explore how it's changed, and what some of the biggest trends were from this edition. So Mark, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So we just came back from drupa. It was my first and your ninth time traveling over to Dusseldorf for drupa. And so I wanted to take some time and kind of talk to you about your experiences in the past, as well as what your thoughts were for this year. And I know, drupa is still going on right now, so we'll still have some news and stuff coming out of it. But so it was your ninth drupa. So your first one was in 1986. Can you recall anything from that year? How old were you? How far into your career, and anything that kind of stood out to you?
Right. Well, yeah, like you say, 1986. And I joined at the time North American Publishing Company in 1982. So I was editor of our packaging magazine, and we had another magazine called Worldwide Printer, and we had a magazine called El Arte Tipográfico, which is in Spanish, and I didn't know a word of Spanish, which that was an adventure producing that. But then I was editor of package printing. So I had just taken over as editor of Printing Impressions in 1985. So going to drupa in 86 was really kind of my coming out party in terms of really like meeting a lot of people in the industry. So that was an experience. Also in 1986, there were some people from our company that didn't want to go to drupa because there was with Gaddafi and Libya going on, there was fear of terrorism, and we had I remember one young lady was like, "I don't want to go." And I was like, "Oh, well, I'll go." Anyway, but remember being at drupa, and there'd be some armed guards there with machine guns and stuff. Nothing happened, but of course we get to drupa, and Chernobyl had happened before drupa, and at the time, even when Chernobyl first came out in the news, I don't think people really understood the magnitude of it. But when you got over to drupa, they were talking about radioactivity. And I remember people saying, like, don't eat the eggs because they come from Poland, they could be contaminated. And so, yeah, that was quite an adventure. And then drupa 1990, we had... I got over there and they booked a room through a guy named Ike Savitt because back in those early drupas, it was really hard to get a hotel room. I mean, you had to book your hotel for the next drupa at the drupa you were at. Otherwise, right, you were not going to get a hotel room in Dusseldorf. So I was going to stay in a private home, which was pretty common then. And I got there before my coworker, and it included like a breakfast, and the lady was very nice, but she couldn't really speak that good of English. And I saw that the room I was in, only had this one, like, I guess it was maybe a double-sized bed. And so I said to her, where is my coworker going to stay, when he comes? And she's like, with you. And I'm like, well, I mean, I'll give all for the company, but I'm not going to sleep in a bed with another guy for a coworker for what would have been at least a week. So, of course, I went to the show, and John Connor was a publisher at that time, and we tracked down the gentleman that had made the reservation and was able to get a hotel room, not in Dusseldorf, but we did find a place to stay, and we actually even got a rental car that we drove to the show every day, which that was a nightmare because where the fairgrounds are is really kind of in a residential area, and the traffic was just a total nightmare. But yeah, it's a blur of of 9 drupas, I mean, certainly, technology, 86, I think was known as sort of the drupa with data exchange, or machines could start to kind of communicate with each other. 1990, digitization, computer to plate in 1995 was a big deal. Creo was the forerunner in the computer to plate movement. 2004, we started first seeing sort of the book on demand capability. 2012, nano ink, green electronics. It's hard to really have one theme because, as you know, Ashley, from now being the first drupa, there's so many technologies on display.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
I can say that I think drupa, you look back into the earlier drupas, and there was such a focus on, coming up and showing technology. Sometimes we frankly never came to market. But I think the product life cycles have changed now. So if a company has a product they can make it commercially available and viable, they're not going to hold it till drupa to show it and sell it, So I think drupa, yes, we did see some prototypes and, like a screen, sheet fed inkjet press at this drupa, things like that. But the days of drupa where something may have been years and years in development and they're just planning it to show at drupa in some type of prototype or, future technology type thing. There's less and less of that.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's funny that you said that, after 9 drupas, they kind of all blend together, because I've only been to one, and I feel like, and I was only there for a week, but I feel like what I saw there has already blended together in my mind, and I can barely keep it straight. So I can't even imagine, having been to 9. But something that you said, this was my first, and I know you took me around and introduced me to people that I hadn't met. I've been in the industry 9 years, but still so many people that I hadn't met. Did you have someone at that first drupa who kind of was there for you in that capacity to introduce you to people, or are you kind of just on your own to figure it
I
out?
was kind of on my own because, I'd taken over, like I say, as editor of Printing Impressions the year before. So, there were some coworkers there, but they were involved with other titles that we had. So, yeah, I was a little bit on my own, but, I was a pretty young guy. I don't remember exactly the age I was when in 86, but, relatively young, and but I was eager and, excited and full of energy. And, I had the energy that you have now.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I thought, everyone warned me before we got there about wearing your walking shoes, and, and I walk a lot in my daily life. But it definitely, I was not prepared for the size of the fairgrounds. I think that was what struck me the most. So there was a period where you had to be at a press conference in one hall, and I needed to go run to do something in another hall. And I was like, oh yeah, no problem. I'll go do that and then meet you at the press conference. It took me, and I'm a fast walker, it took me 30 plus minutes to walk from the way far end of the fairgrounds to where I needed to be for the press conference. And I just couldn't believe it. I think not having been there, even though I saw, the maps and everyone warned me, I think it's so much bigger than you imagine once you go for the first time. So I think that was what struck me. But, so you shared a few experiences. And I wonder if you could talk about some other memorable stuff that's happened over the years. I know you've told me a few stories, but what are some of
Yeah.
the things that stick out in your mind from previous
Well,
trips?
to be honest, the most memorable experience for me was Drupa 2000, and it was for all the wrong reasons. I had my briefcase stolen. I'd flown to Frankfurt and taken the train to Dusseldorf, and just arrived in the Dusseldorf train station. I was with 2 other coworkers and a friend of mine who was exhibiting there at the show, but he was a college friend, and he was watching our bags. We were going to go in and exchange to get some Deutschmarks, and they came up, they distracted him, and all they took was my briefcase. But so it had my passport in it. I did have my wallet, so it didn't have any money in it, but it did have, I had gotten a bunch of American Express travel checks like you got back then. And of
Right.
course,
Yeah.
they gave you these little pieces of paper with the numbers that they said to keep separate from the traveler's check. So of course that was all together. So it was several $100s, which I eventually did get reimbursed from American Express, but it took quite a bit of doing and calls and begging. I had to go to an office there. But yeah, so first thing after that happened, there was a U.S. consulate office very close to the Dusseldorf train station. So I went there. They sent me back to the train station to get a photo taken in a little photo booth, which for years I had to use that, still keep that passport photo with this look on my face of like exhaustion combined with like terror of, just the thoughts like, because I'm just was thinking over, like, well, this was in the briefcase and that was in the briefcase, and
Right. Right.
my
Yeah.
schedule and my car keys and my car parked at the airport in Philly, and just on and on and on. But it all worked out. At the moment, feeling exhausted from lack of sleep, it seemed like I was ready to just like pack it in and go back home. But it all worked out. The Drupa organizers were wonderful to me in terms of helping me out, get situated. And so, yeah, when I got back, I wrote an editorial, and I think the headline was something like, not Deutschmarks, but an easy mark. Wrote about my experience of the briefcase. And literally for years, some people in the industry were coming up to me, oh, yeah, you're the guy that had the briefcase stolen.
Oh no.
Yeah, unfortunately, I am. So, it just added kind of a human perspective to, things that can happen when you travel. And of course, with Drupa, where people are coming there from around the world, it's going to draw a criminal element, and, they're going to prey on foreigners. So, it was just my bad luck, but it made for a good editorial, and, it made me for years the guy that had his briefcase stolen.
Right. Yeah. And 24 years later, we're talking about it.
Right,
Funny,
right.
you can
So,
laugh about it now. It happens, stuff like that happens when you travel, but you don't want it to happen when you're on a work trip too, because I feel like,
yeah,
it's just, I mean, you don't want it to happen ever, but
right. Yeah, it was not one of the greater moments, but it's something I'll never forget. And like you say, uh, 24 years later, I actually look back at it pretty fondly. So
yeah. Um, so you also told a story of when you went to Cologne and you missed
yeah, well,
Right.
Cologne is, I think, about maybe 30 miles away, and there's trains that run there. And actually, at Drupa, I mean, you have people staying in Cologne. You even have people that stay in Amsterdam that would commute to the show. I mean, um, so it's pretty crazy how far out some people are staying from the actual fairgrounds in Dusseldorf. But yeah, we had the idea to go to Cologne, check that out. It was at night, and there's a beautiful cathedral there. What we didn't check out was the train schedule to get back. So, we found out we didn't have any way to get back, and we had to take a taxi the whole way. And I just remember my coworker and I were kind of nervous about turning that expense in for this taxi fare, but we got reimbursed, so it was all good.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know, you might not agree with this, but for me, this time, obviously we saw such, so much, and we talked about some of the trends, and we'll get into some trends in a minute. But for me, one of the things before we even got there, you were telling me about Benny Landa and how, great it is to see him speak. And he was doing, I think every day, multiple, events at the Landa booth this year. And how passionate he is. And so I was excited to see that. But then we actually got to meet with him one-on-one, which was kind of exciting for me because, for the past 9 years, the time that I've been in the industry, he's kind of been this presence and this like legendary person. And, I've been to Landa events and stuff, and I've never had the opportunity to meet him. So for me, I'm sure, years from now, that'll be something that I remember as being, kind of a standout, getting to get to know him for a little bit and spend some time with him. And that was really nice.
Yeah, well, and he is, the father of digital printing in a lot of ways. I mean, he was a forerunner from a technology standpoint with Indigo, and um, he's nobody will ever fault him on lack of charisma, and he's got this great. I was joking to you, that he could have been doing professional voiceovers because he's got this deep
Mm-hmm.
David Attenborough kind of voice. And so yeah, it was
Absolutely.
great that we were able to have a one-on-one with him and that you were able to meet him personally. And he's getting up there in years, but he's still full of vigor and passion for the industry, no doubt.
Yeah. That was great. So, this year being your ninth, and it would have been your 10th if, obviously if something didn't happen in 2020. But what were your feelings about this year? And, in years past, how did this one compare?
Well, I mean, it was a great show. Like I say, some of the where I commented earlier about some of the technology in terms of people can't like hold that. But still we saw just for example in the inkjet world, a lot of new B2 format presses shown and continuous feed also, just about every vendor in the inkjet space also had a new continuous feed model. But things got off with a bang the day before the show with the Canon and Heidelberg press conferences, where Canon announced a new B2 format press, which they'd kept under wraps, and it's going to be resold by Heidelberg, which also was kept under wraps. In fact, talking to the Heidelberg folks later, people in the company didn't even know anything about it. Like they kept it a total secret. They said it was almost James Bondish the way that they kept it and didn't want it to get out. So that was pretty cool. And so that really was one of the highlights of the show. That got things off, and that was the day before the show even started.
Right.
And after that, it was a blur of press conferences. The good side of that is you get technology updates from everybody. The bad side of it is a lot of them were in rooms with PowerPoints, and it's not quite the same as getting out into the halls, 18 halls to really see the technology. But as we it changed too from the earlier drupas. I was there gathering information, and you came back and then you wrote all about it, and it was in print in the next issue. This drupa, you're doing it much more. We did a video every day, posting on social. So it's much more spontaneous versus pre-internet days.
Yeah. I guess we hadn't really talked about that, but that's a really great point. I mean, we were able to get people the information immediately. That day we were bringing people live, information from the show floor. And actually that's something that people commented on, that they were looking forward to the updates and enjoying the updates. But yeah, I guess in previous,
Yeah, just getting all
timelines,
the
you would have had
press
to wait.
releases. Yeah, just getting all the press releases posted as they came out, yeah, because you go way back. I mean, I was coming back from Drupa literally with bags full of paper press kits, that I was schlepping back in actual physical photos.
Right.
The Drupa organizers, you would pick photos you wanted, and they would print them out for you, and you would, bring those back with you. And so yeah, I mean, it's a different world now in terms of everything is much more immediate. Maybe not as, I mean, one of the advantages of print was, maybe we got into things a little deeper back then. But that's just a little bit our world today from back then. I think people just want to know the highlights, and they'll find out that if they're interested, they'll dig deeper into it. But they want to just know what the highlights were.
Right. And you brought up a good point about the press kits. So, obviously we are very much pro print at
Right.
Printing Impressions and at Drupa. But I did appreciate, because we were traveling from all over the world, journalists in particular from all over the world, the press kits this year, more so than other events that I've been to, the QR code with
Right.
just a piece of, a postcard the size of, a piece of direct mail with a QR code that you scan. And then right there at your fingertips, you have all of the images, the press releases, any, materials that have to accompany the press release. I thought that was, oh my God. So it made everything so much easier from my perspective, not having to, schlep home, as you said, coming home with probably a suitcase full of press kits. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, yeah, there was definitely a trend with more with QR codes versus giving us like a stick. It used to be, yeah, they'd hand you a stick as everybody walked out kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, QR codes were much more prevalent this time around.
So, we've talked through some of the trends, and I know we did a video on it before, but one of the big things, so you talked about B2 and some of the developments in technology, but I think a huge thing that we noticed and we talked about was how many robotics. And I know that, has to do with automation and but that was really cool to see on the show floor, these robotics actually, in motion, and seeing what they can do, which is something kind of new to me to see.
Yeah, no, it was fascinating. And I think the realization has set in that, our industry, we can't find workers. So you have to move to automation. So it's not even just a nice to have to eliminate some of these heavy manual tasks. There are no other options. So, I think, yeah, automation was just prevalent with robots, but even just, in the offset world and the finishing aspect, everything's automated. And I think one of the interesting things too, and in fact, we were talking, one of the themes of the video we did on trends was, it's not digital versus or offset, it's digital and offset. And we certainly saw a major presence of offset printing at the show. Highly automated offset presses, huge crowds to see those demonstrations. So there's still offset still frankly dominates our industry in terms of page volume and will for many years to come. And so, and we look at everything from just the American perspective, but you have to look at drupa from a global perspective. And certainly in a lot of countries, offset is even more prominent than digital. It's like Komori and Heidelberg and Koenigsbauer and RMGT. I mean, they were just packed with people whenever they were doing offset press demos. And it was all about automation. It was all about minimal make ready, to make offset more competitive with digital. Because, the trend of shorter runs is not going to go away.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned, this was kind of on a global scale versus an offset being more prevalent versus the US, but as a focus. Another thing that we had talked about is sustainability, which we know is a growing concern among, end users, consumers, which is then driving the brands to want more sustainable products and packaging, and which then obviously affects our industry. And so that was a huge focus at drupa. Again, in Europe, it's a little bit more of a focus and a push. But it was everywhere. I mean, it was every which way you would turn, there was something about sustainability in the press conferences and the booths, consumables, but then also energy reduction, waste reduction. So I thought that was really interesting because it's something personally that I'm very interested in, and I hope to see grow as a bigger concern in the US versus just on the global scale. But yeah, it was everywhere, sustainability.
Right. And I guess just as a final thought is, drupa, which is a melting pot for the world of print, which is just wonderful to bring the global print community together. But, with that said, the number of American printers that go to drupa is still a relatively low number. And frankly, it's always been that way. So, really Printing United Expo in Las Vegas in September, it's going to be the first chance for a lot of these US printers to hear and see some of these technologies that were on display at drupa. So that's going to make that a very exciting show with some special meaning this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited for that. Well, Mark, thank you so much, not just for joining me on the podcast, but also for kind of showing me the ropes and taking me around my first drupa.
Oh, it was a real pleasure. And it was all a blur, but we had a good time together, and it was just it's just a wonderful being part of the community, and it just really gives you a sense of adrenaline when you see the power of print and all the different applications that were on display at a exhibition like drupa. It just really gives you kind of a shot in the arm.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank Mark for joining me on today's episode. I will include links to our video coverage below. And I also want to thank all of you, our audience. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Impressions Xchange podcast.